Commissioner Gordon, Bane has escaped.
Your nervous system is not built for greatness. It is built for survival, and that difference explains almost everything you keep misinterpreting about yourself. The moment you sit down to do something demanding, something unclear, something that stretches your ability, your brain doesn't congratulate you for aiming higher. It sends resistance, not because you are incapable, but because you are stepping outside the boundaries of what it recognizes as safe. That resistance feels like laziness, like lack of interest, like confusion. You label it as a personal flaw. It isn't. It is a protective mechanism misfiring in an environment where danger is no longer physical. The real problem begins when you obey it. Each time you retreat from that discomfort, you reinforce the idea that uncertainty is a threat. That association becomes stronger with repetition. And suddenly, growth itself feels like something to avoid. A child staring at a math problem is not dealing with numbers. They are dealing with unfamiliarity. Unfamiliarity triggers cognitive strain, and cognitive strain feels like discomfort. That discomfort gets interpreted as inability. The parent sees avoidance and assumes a lack of discipline. The child feels tension and assumes a lack of intelligence. Both are wrong. The brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is trying to conserve energy and reduce exposure to the unknown. But here's the fracture point. In a modern world, the unknown is where opportunity lives. Avoiding it doesn't protect you. It traps you. So what looks like disinterest is actually an untrained response to uncertainty. And without intervention, that response becomes permanent. You were never taught how to sit inside confusion without escaping it. You were taught to resolve it quickly, to find answers, to eliminate discomfort as fast as possible. That conditioning feels productive, but it creates fragility. The moment you encounter something that cannot be solved immediately, your system begins to shut down. Not because you lack intelligence, but because you lack tolerance. Tolerance for ambiguity, tolerance for not knowing. That tolerance is not natural, it is built. And without it, your capacity for growth remains shallow. You skim the surface of things because depth requires you to stay in a state that feels unstable. The pain of becoming someone is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with intensity. It shows up in quiet moments where you choose between engagement and escape. You open something difficult. You feel resistance. You close it. That sequence feels insignificant. Repeat it enough times and it defines your trajectory. Becoming someone different requires interrupting that pattern consistently. It requires staying when everything in you suggests leaving. That is where the real work happens. Not in the outcome, but in the decision to remain present in discomfort without seeking relief. Your brain confuses effort with danger because historically, prolonged effort often meant risk. Fatigue, exposure, vulnerability. That wiring still exists. So when you push yourself mentally, it interprets the signal as something to avoid. This is why hard work feels unnatural. Not because it is wrong, but because it contradicts your default programming. You are working against a system designed to keep you within predictable limits. And every time you override that system, you create tension. That tension is what people call pain. It is not damage, it is adaptation. Comfort has been disguised as a reward, when in reality it is a ceiling. You are encouraged to find ease, to reduce friction, to make things simpler. That philosophy works in certain contexts. It becomes destructive when applied to growth, because growth is not efficient. It is chaotic, uncomfortable, inconsistent. If you optimize for comfort, you eliminate the very conditions required for expansion. You stay within what feels manageable, and manageable rarely leads to transformation. It leads to maintenance. You maintain your current level while convincing yourself you are progressing. A deeper issue emerges when you start identifying with your resistance. You begin to say things like, "This isn't for me," or "I'm just not good at this." Those statements feel honest. They feel like self-awareness. They are conclusions drawn from untrained responses. You are not observing your limits. You are reacting to discomfort and labeling it as identity. That label becomes permanent if you don't challenge it. And once it becomes part of your identity, you stop trying altogether. Not because you can't improve, but because you've convinced yourself there's no point. Pleasure became cheap the moment effort was removed from the equation, and your system adapted faster than you realized. Dopamine is not joy, it is anticipation, a signal that something rewarding is about to happen. When that signal fires without resistance, without delay, without cost, it starts rewriting your expectations of reality. Suddenly, anything that requires patience feels broken. Anything that asks you to sit through friction feels like punishment. You begin to measure tasks not by their value, but by how quickly they satisfy you. That shift is subtle at first. Then it becomes the filter through which you experience everything. And once that filter is in place, anything meaningful starts to feel less appealing than what is immediate. Scroll long enough and your brain begins to expect reward without input. Watch, tap, consume, repeat. No resistance, no delay, just a continuous stream of stimulation that never demands anything from you. This creates a dangerous imbalance because the systems that produce real outcomes operate differently. They require effort before reward. They require time before clarity. When your brain is conditioned to receive first and give later, it rejects these systems entirely. You don't lose interest in growth. You lose tolerance for the process that creates it. That is the trap. Not addiction in the obvious sense, but a quiet rewiring that shifts your preferences toward ease and away from anything that demands engagement. A deeper fracture appears when reward becomes disconnected from reality. You feel satisfaction without achievement, a sense of completion without having completed anything. That illusion reduces your drive. Why push through difficulty when your brain has already received something that mimics success? This is where progress stalls. Not because you stopped trying, but because your system believes it has already received what it needed. That false signal is powerful. It convinces you that you are moving forward when you are not. And the longer you stay in that loop, the harder it becomes to distinguish between actual progress and simulated reward. Control begins where you disrupt that loop deliberately, not by eliminating pleasure, but by restructuring its source. You shift your reward system away from instant gratification and toward effort-based outcomes. This feels unnatural at first. Your brain resists. It seeks the familiar path. It looks for shortcuts. Ignoring that impulse is uncomfortable. That discomfort is the recalibration. It is your system adjusting to a new standard. Each time you delay reward, each time you attach it to effort, you restore balance. The process is not immediate. It requires repetition, it requires consistency, but it works because your brain is adaptable. It follows the patterns you reinforce. There's a hidden cost to constant stimulation that rarely gets acknowledged. It fragments your attention. Each hit of dopamine pulls your focus in a different direction. Over time, this reduces your ability to stay with one task long enough to complete it. You begin to think in shorter intervals. Your patience shrinks. Complex work feels overwhelming because it requires sustained engagement. This is not a lack of ability. It is a trained response. You have conditioned yourself to operate in bursts rather than depth. Reversing this requires more than willpower. It requires rebuilding your capacity to focus. That means reducing inputs that constantly interrupt your attention and reintroducing tasks that demand sustained effort. The problem intensifies when pleasure becomes your primary metric for decision-making. You start choosing actions based on how they feel in the moment rather than what they produce in the long term. This creates a bias toward ease. Hard tasks get postponed. Difficult decisions get delayed. This pattern compounds. It shapes your life in ways that are not immediately visible. You wake up one day and realize that you've been optimizing for comfort instead of progress, and the gap between where you are and where you want to be has widened quietly, not through failure, but through consistent avoidance of effort. Balance does not mean removing enjoyment. It means aligning it with growth. Small pleasures earned through effort carry a different weight. They reinforce the behavior that produced them. They create a feedback loop that supports progress. In contrast, unearned rewards break that loop. They disconnect action from outcome. This is where discipline becomes practical. Not as restriction, but as alignment. You choose when to engage with easy rewards. You control their frequency. You prevent them from dominating your system. This creates stability. It allows you to enjoy without losing direction. There is a threshold where your system begins to shift. Effort stops feeling like resistance and starts feeling like engagement. The work itself becomes rewarding. Not because it is easy, but because it is meaningful. That transition changes everything. You no longer rely on external stimulation to stay motivated. You generate your own through progress. Each step forward reinforces the process. This creates momentum. It makes it easier to continue. And once you reach this point, the pull of instant gratification weakens. It loses its grip because it no longer offers something you need. You didn't collapse in one dramatic moment. You negotiated your way into mediocrity quietly, politely, repeatedly. Each compromise felt harmless. Each delay felt justified. Each small decision to choose comfort over growth carried no immediate consequence. That's why it worked. That's why you didn't notice. Betrayal rarely announces itself. It accumulates through permission. Permission to postpone, to relax standards, to accept less than what you know you could be. And now you stand in a position where you can see the gap clearly. Not between you and someone else, but between you and what you avoided becoming. Look at the people around you who rely on you, not for what you are, but for what you could have been. There's a difference. Potential carries responsibility, not in a moral sense, but in a structural one. If you have the capacity to solve problems, to create stability, to elevate others, then choosing not to develop that capacity leaves a void. That void doesn't disappear. It gets filled by lesser outcomes. Problems remain unsolved. Standards remain low. Patterns repeat across generations. You don't just affect your own trajectory. You shape the environment others are forced to operate in. And when you underperform relative to your capability, that impact multiplies. You tell yourself that you're not ready, that circumstances aren't right, that you'll start when things align. That narrative feels reasonable because it removes pressure. It gives you space to delay without guilt. But it hides a harsher truth. You are not waiting for the right moment. You are avoiding the cost of commitment. Commitment eliminates alternatives. It forces focus. It removes the option to retreat into comfort. That level of clarity is uncomfortable because it exposes everything you've been avoiding. So you stay in a state of partial engagement, doing enough to feel productive, not enough to change anything. The herd doesn't drag you. It absorbs you, gradually, through shared behaviors, shared excuses, shared limits. You don't feel controlled because everyone around you is doing the same thing. That normalizes stagnation. It creates a feedback loop where average becomes acceptable. Breaking away from that requires more than awareness, not physical isolation, but behavioral divergence. You act differently. You prioritize differently. You tolerate discomfort others avoid. That creates distance. And that distance feels uncomfortable because it removes the validation that comes from blending in. There's a specific moment where the illusion cracks. It doesn't happen during success. It happens during stillness. When there's nothing distracting you, nothing occupying your attention, and you're left alone with your own thoughts. That's where the truth surfaces. You see what you've been avoiding. You feel the weight of unused potential. That moment is easy to escape. Pick up your phone, turn on something, distract yourself. Most do. A few don't. A few sit with it. And that's where the shift begins. Not in action, but in refusal to escape awareness. You have trained yourself to respond to discomfort with avoidance. That pattern runs deep. It doesn't just affect work. It affects decisions, relationships, priorities. Anything that requires effort or confrontation gets delayed. That delay feels like relief in the moment. It becomes regret later. Breaking that pattern requires a different response. Not dramatic action, but consistent refusal to retreat. Each time you stay, each time you engage instead of escape, you weaken the pattern. It doesn't disappear instantly. It erodes, and as it erodes, your capacity expands. The uncomfortable truth is that you already know what needs to change. Not in a vague sense, but specifically. You know which habits are holding you back. You know which actions you're avoiding. You know where you're underperforming. The issue is not lack of clarity. It's lack of alignment between knowledge and behavior. That gap defines your current state. Closing it requires action that feels disproportionate to the moment. You do the hard thing when it feels unnecessary. You act when there's no immediate reward. That's where the real shift happens. Your environment reflects your standards. Not what you say you value, but what you consistently accept. If your surroundings are chaotic, inconsistent, unproductive, it's because your standards allow it. Raising those standards creates friction. You start rejecting things you previously tolerated. That rejection creates space. Space for better habits, better inputs, better outcomes. But it also creates discomfort. You are no longer operating within familiar patterns. That discomfort is a signal that change is occurring. There's a version of you that exists only as a possibility. Not a fantasy, not an abstract idea, but a direct result of choices you haven't made yet. That version is not blocked by external forces. It is blocked by internal hesitation. Each time you choose comfort, you move further away from it. Each time you choose effort, you move closer. This is not philosophical, it's mechanical. Your actions determine your position relative to that version. Nothing else. Zoom out far enough and the illusion of fairness dissolves completely. No one is assigned a lane. No one is guaranteed a place. No one is protected from being outperformed. You are one signal among billions competing for attention, for resources, for relevance. That's not pessimism, it's structure. The system doesn't care about your intentions, your potential, your internal narrative. It responds to output. It rewards what performs. That's the part that feels brutal because it strips away emotional cushioning. You don't get points for effort that never materializes into impact. You don't get recognized for what you could have done. The world responds to what you actually produce. Everything else is invisible. Strip the word competition of its emotional weight and something colder remains. It's simply comparison at scale. Every action you take is measured against alternatives, whether you acknowledge it or not. The job you want, the attention you seek, the influence you aim for, all of it is evaluated relative to someone else. That comparison doesn't pause because you feel unprepared. It doesn't slow down because you're still figuring things out. It continues, constantly. And while you hesitate, refine, wait for clarity, someone else is executing. That's not a motivational line. It's a mechanical reality. Output competes with output, and hesitation has no defensive value in that system. There's a deeper discomfort hidden inside this idea. You don't dislike competition because it's unfair. You dislike it because it removes ambiguity. It shows you exactly where you stand. No hiding, no reinterpretation, no narrative to soften the gap. You either meet the standard or you don't. That level of clarity is threatening because it eliminates the comfort of potential. Potential allows you to imagine a better version of yourself without proving it. Competition demands proof. It forces alignment between what you claim and what you deliver. That exposure is what most people avoid, not the act of competing itself. Observe how quickly people retreat into moral arguments when performance becomes the metric. Suddenly, the system is flawed, the rules are unfair, the structure is biased. Sometimes that's true, often it's a shield. Because acknowledging the need to compete requires confronting your current level. It requires admitting that you are not yet where you need to be. That admission creates pressure. Pressure demands response. Avoiding that response is easier when you can externalize the problem. It protects your identity at the cost of your progress. And that trade happens quietly, repeatedly until it becomes your default. A more unsettling layer emerges when you realize that opting out is not neutral. Refusing to engage does not freeze your position. It lowers it. The system continues moving. Standards rise. Expectations shift. While you remain static, the baseline advances. What once required moderate effort now demands precision. What once stood out now blends in. This is how people fall behind without noticing. They assume that staying where they are is stable. It isn't. It's regression relative to a moving environment. Competing is not about aggression. It's about maintaining position in a system that never pauses. Intensity becomes unavoidable at a certain level. Not the chaotic kind, but focused, deliberate pressure applied to your own development. You push beyond what feels necessary because necessary is defined by your current position, not your desired one. This creates a gap. Closing that gap requires output that exceeds your current standard. That effort feels excessive. It looks unnecessary from the outside. Internally, it's calibration. You are adjusting to a higher level of demand. Without that adjustment, you remain anchored to your current baseline, watching others move past you, while convincing yourself you're still in the race. There's a psychological fracture point where you either accept this reality or continue negotiating with it. Acceptance doesn't mean liking it. It means aligning with it. You stop expecting the system to adapt to you. You adapt to it. That shift changes how you operate. You become more precise, more intentional, more aware of how your actions translate into outcomes. You stop wasting energy on things that don't move the needle. You start focusing on what actually matters. This is where efficiency replaces effort. Not by doing less, but by doing what counts. The idea of being above competition often hides a lack of engagement. It sounds elevated, detached, refined. In practice, it's avoidance wrapped in philosophy. You cannot transcend a system you haven't mastered. You cannot rise above something you never fully entered. Competing at a high level requires understanding the dynamics, the incentives, the patterns. Once you understand them, you can choose how to engage. Without that understanding, your disengagement is not strategic, it's reactive. And reaction rarely leads to control. At a certain point, the question stops being whether you want to compete. It becomes whether you are willing to accept the consequences of not doing so. because those consequences are not abstract. They show up in missed opportunities, in limited options, in reduced influence over your own direction. The system does not punish you for opting out. It simply stops considering you, and irrelevance is quieter than failure. It doesn't hurt immediately. It accumulates,